Now, a guy named Bob Altemeyer, and I'll put this document up on our website or a link to it, he wrote a little free book called The Authoritarians. And he's done studies for like many centuries, for many decades now about authoritarian folk in the United States. And what he sees is that authoritarian submissives have a high degree of submission to established legitimate authorities in their society, high levels of aggression in the name of their authorities to people who are different, and a high level of conventionalism. And what the authoritarians that I had and many others like them have done is to use the Scripture as the primary authority with these authoritarian submissive folk who probably represent maybe 20 to 25% of our population. And use that authority of Scripture to keep them under their control. But they don't pay attention to all kinds of passages, including, if you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, you shall not deal with them as a creditor. You shall not exact interest from them. When was the last time you ever heard a biblical fundamentalist use that passage? Are you kidding? Capitalism came down from heaven on a silver platter. When was the last time that you heard a fundamentalist who cut off their hand because their hand caused them to sin? Or plucked out their eyeball because their eyeball caused them to sin? Or even turned off their TV because their TV caused them to sin? In a 2000 poll, 12% of Americans thought that Joan of Arc was Noah's wife. 1 in 4 Americans expected the second coming of Jesus in 2007, which was, I think, a few years ago. So maybe
2011.
Maybe we've missed it. But what's not so funny is that, according to the FBI, 17.6% were victims of hate crimes because of a bias against a particular sexual orientation. And so what is happening is, in my view, is that authoritarian controlling folk in our country are using the gay and lesbian issue, which is a deep purity issue in people just feel it's icky, as a means to keep their group together. I know of a local pastor, I also know of another pastor, who continually railed against homosexuals and how bad they all were. Meanwhile, was using his position of authority to have sexual intercourse with members of his congregation. That's not an uncommon story. So, I like the last one especially. So remember that any theology that tells you that God is powerful, that to be truly human is to be powerful, and therefore we must get power over others, or that God is all powerful and therefore you must submit to God, therefore you must submit to the preacher, which is the same thing. Because then we'll get power over other groups because we're listening to this preacher. That is not of God. Because in Exodus chapter 1, God saw a situation just like that where the people of Israel were slaves, and God said, I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I've heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their suffering, and I've come down to deliver them. It was the first time in recorded history, apparently, that we know of, that somebody used the idea of God to take down an authoritarian notion of God. And that Judaism and Christianity are both centered in fighting back against authoritarian uses of God language and scapegoating other people. We believe in a God whose primary character is compassion and not power. So to the great Roman drama queen Glennis Beckis, we say, sorry, Glenn, the heart of both Jewish and Christian theologies is a radical protest against the use of religion by the powerful to keep people powerless, feeling stupid or guilty or dumb or dependent, and to maintain unity by scapegoating the vulnerable. That is not what Christianity is about. Christianity is a protest to that. And Jesus, on the cross, uncovers the whole thing and says, you can make me the scapegoat for all you got going on here. And guess what happens? Life can't be killed. God's power in the world can't be authoritarianized away. It cannot be pushed down by the powerful. And he reveals to us that God is not so much powerful as God is willing to enter into the pain and alienation that all human beings experience, that God is willing to suffer with the 17.6% of those who experienced a hate crime because they are gay and lesbian. The character of God is to suffer with them. That's the character of God. But there is all around us a deep cultural change. And that's why this issue is coming up at the time that it is, so powerfully. We are trying to figure out as a big society what has authority for us. We are trying to understand how we manage life and death as human beings. We are trying to figure out how to live together despite the significant differences in worldview and culture that we have from one another. About how we're going to live on this planet in a way that respects the ecosystem and those who will live after us. We are not certain about these questions, and unless we're able to come to some good understandings together, we're going to have a lot of warfare and a lot of bloodshed. These are the deep cultural changes. These things are up for grabs at this moment.